Yesterday, I painted this gouache entry in my journal from our visit to Cades Cove. Entering Cades Cove is what the sign says. And I used a light wash of gouache, and I'm going to do another painting again of that similar scene, but I'm going to film it this time. So today I have, this is a moleskine journal that I use as my Smoky Mountain journal, and I will show you the picture that I'm working from will be added to the screen. And one of the things about visiting Cades Cove is there are some horses that have been rescued, and those horses are in a field as you come into the cove to the left, and sometimes they're right up close and you can see them pretty easily, and sometimes you have to, you know, come back another time because they are nowhere to be seen. But this is a sign that is in one of the areas off of Sparks Lane, I believe it is, one of the side roads, and it says horses may bite or kick. So I just thought since I had a sign over there that I would add a sign over here. Um, I always do lettering in pencil first because it helps me get the spacing right and doesn't have to be exact. But I also spell things incorrectly often, so I want to make sure that um, I'm a little more accurate on that. Bite or kick is pretty easy to spell, but see, like right now, I'm kind of running out of space. And I took a little too much space for that, but I'll come back and fix that in a minute. One of the things I love about gouache and don't like about it is it can be reactivated. Yesterday's palette was this. You can see the colors that I used here in this painting, and I'm going to reuse some of these paints in this one because why not? They're right there and they're already muted colors. The thing about my gouache palette, it is not muted colors. So it is very bright, vibrant colors. See? Very bright and vibrant. If I tried to paint a scene with those straight out of the tube, that would just not be a good thing. So if you are not familiar with the color wheel, I would highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with it before you do any painting with any kind of generic color. I'm just spritzing the paint with a water bottle to kind of wake it up. Sometimes I use a pipette to drop in the paint. It's also something that I carry in my kit so that I can just drop in drops of paint in there. So I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly and see how I can capture the mood. It was kind of a hazy morning and we got to Cades Cove fairly early. The thing about gouache, you can also do light over dark and dark over light. The lightest light in a painting is usually the sky. When I start with a light, I start with the white. I want a tiny bit of blue, not much at all. And see, that's might still be, that might be too bright, but we'll see. I'm going to just lay that in toward the top. It's okay, there was a little green in that because there's a green distant hill. I'm going to come over here and pick up some of the used paint from yesterday. That was a little too bright, so I'm going to dull it down. That's a little too dark. So I'm going to lighten that up a little bit. There's one of the distant hills. It goes into a little bit of green. It was toward the end of the peak season, and I don't want anything too smooth back there because it was, the foliage was changing. And when I lay in with this brush, sometimes I even let it, the bristles spread out a little bit. Okay, over on this side, there was an oranger mountain. I think that's way too dark. That's one thing about gouache. It paints darker than it looks. So I want more of a peachy tone. That is still too dark. Looks too brown. I want more of an orange in there, like a fall color in the warmth of the mountain. There we go. That's a little better. I'm going to just lay this kind of sideways. I'll come back and add some shadowy color with a little bit of blue. Mix that in. Probably a little too green. Oops, I don't have a paper towel. Let me grab one here. You want a paper towel so you can dry off your brush, clean it up, and start with a better mix. There was a lot of blue in these shadows, so I really want to emphasize that. So I wiped I wiped the water off my paintbrush. If you don't wipe the water off, then the gouache is just going to be lifted off. If it's too wet, it will just come right off. I don't like the shape of that mountain. Let's come back with a little more blue and fix that shadow edge. It's actually too light to be that far in the distance, so I'm going to come over with a pale white. It was kind of an unusual colored hill because the trees in the lower part of the mountain were orange, and they still had their leaves. And then some of the trees in the hills in the far distance that were in the higher elevation had already lost their leaves. So I'm going to add some of that orange tones in these upper closer hills, just so that it looks a little more autumny. That's a word. Kind of bounce it around. I don't want it too solid at this point. And then this is going to fade into a brighter tree. It's really pretty. I wiped my brush off in the water. I went back and lifted off some paint that was in my palette. And this tree is brighter, and it's above the tree line, or the edge of the mountain in the back. That's too much one color. So I'm going to go to my palette and wet some dark green that I had yesterday. And I'm going to just mix that in with the orange to create a darkness of shadow. And then I'll need more paint because I need a dark green. I don't want it too bright. So I pick up a little blue, a little Kelly green, and then I take some of the orange that's already on my palette, mix that in so it dulls it down. So it's a darker green that will create that lower edge of shrubbery. So now that it's laid in, then I'm going to drag it up to show some foliage along the line of the road or wherever this happens to be. Now this is very dark right now, so it will have other colors added to it. And when I look at the picture, it's some of this is too big for the area, but it's all right. Still gives me the feel of where I am. If it's too bold, which it really is, I'm going to get that paint off my brush, go get some wetter paint, and while this is wet, I'm just going to add some to it, lighten it up, which is too dark. But I want the underside of that hillside darker. So now if I wipe my brush, if I have too much paint or I want it more transparent, I can just lift off some of that paint with a slightly damp brush. And that tree is way too bright, so I'm going to lift off some of that too. I want it to be a focus, but I don't want it so unrealistic. I'm going to let the mountain in the distance continue, so I want a little more blue in there to push that back. I want more light because these two are looking too much alike, so I'm going to my palette and I'm picking up a little bit of kind of a pale yellow ochre that was there yesterday. So I'm going to put that where some of the light is on the hill. I also want some of that color in the grassy area down below. So before I put anything in the foreground, I'm going to lay in some grass. Just doing it horizontal right now because it's in the distance. I want that a little lighter, so I'm going to pick up some white and drag that over it. I want it more chalky looking, dusty light. I'm going to come back to the green that I had, kind of a muted dark green, and I'm going to put, that's too dark, so I'm going to add some of that white to it. If you have your background too dark, it's going to come forward, and if it's too warm, like that tree's kind of popping forward. So I'm gonna mute it a little bit. And there's a taller tree right here that's more of the more foliage, like almost springtime, which was kind of weird because some trees are very fall-like and some are not. So Not sure that I really like that sticking on the edge, kind of pulls your eye off, but that's what it is right now. Now I'm going to come back to this orange orange tree, and I'm going to make it more of a burnt sienna. So I'm going to look at where the shadows are in it and try to make that a little darker. If I want to mute orange, I can add a little blue to it, but sometimes that's a little too blue. But if I can lightly go over it slightly with blue, just like a glaze, then it's not as bright. I want it to be there, but I don't want it to be screaming at you. What is right here is too orange for the ground area, so I'm going to cut in with a darker dark as though I'm up underneath that tree and creating some shadow areas. And that's too dark. I have no paint on my brush. I don't know if y'all can hear the wind chimes outside. There's a slight breeze, and it's been raining most of the day. So I haven't been outside much. My mom also had surgery today. It went well. I was very pleased. And I will be traveling to Texas in the near future when she gets out of rehab. So I'm going to try to be filming and doing some things ahead of time. So while I'm out of town, I won't be missing my YouTube uploads. So that might not be important to you, but I made a commitment to myself, well, a little over a year ago, that I really wanted to see how this would go and what I could do with the YouTube videos, and if I could build anything with it, artistic wise and business wise. And right now I'm still learning so very much. So I hope you enjoy some of what I'm creating. It is, let me know what's helpful for you, and I'll try to do more of it. So what I'm now looking at is there's a tree that's right here, and it goes off the page. I'm not sure if it's really needed, but I'm going to show you that you can paint on top of gouache. Now this needs to be dry for it to really work the best. If it's dry and I don't have a lot of water in my brush, then I can lay the paint directly on top, and that's too dark, but I can come back and lighten it. So this is going to go down into the grasses, and while I have that dark on my brush, I'm going to go ahead and paint in the dark of this sign. It's down here, and the top of it's actually covered in moss, but I'm going to, oh, I didn't draw it tall enough. I'm going to see, I can just make that a little taller. The joy of the gouache is you can paint over things and correct mistakes. So that part I like. It's a little more forgiving than your watercolors. So I'm going to just go ahead and paint this sign, give it a base color. You can see where those strokes overlapped. One's a little darker than the other. And that's all right. That's when it's wood, it's often that way. I want it dark enough that when I put the white lettering, you'll be able to see it. Okay, so be painting around this as I do the grasses. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's not, but that's okay. If I mess up, I can go over it. So right now I'm just wetting. I'll pick this up so you can see it, sorry. So much of what I've done is I've just been using this. So I'm just wetting this again. It's a muted green, and I'm going to fill in some of the grasses just in a solid way to start off with. Because when I squint my eyes in the picture, this part's pretty solid. And I can go squiggle with my brush and go different directions to indicate the different directions of the grasses that are there, and to give it variety. And the grasses are taller than the sign, so we can do that. You can also scratch in if you want to. I don't even have, just some lines. This is just with the end of the brush. I'm not sure with gouache if when you paint over that, if that's going to really sink in or make much of a difference if that's way too dark. But I want to add a variety of colors, a variety of textures. I don't want to be too exact here. Again, if I get it too dark, I can just, dip it in the water, lift it up. I don't want to get it too soppy wet. So I want to have the darker colors first, preferably, so that I can come over some of this with some lighter highlights and speckles and stuff like that. So just trying to add a variety right now. And, some of them need to come a little taller. I might need to change brushes, but right now, see how that's splitting up? That's okay for what I'm doing. And I don't usually use masking fluid or Frisket or things like that. I just try to paint around the best I can with what I have, because I don't want to have something that has to be left to dry. Now this is the fall, so I'm going to throw in little bits of warmer tones, a little bit of the orangey things that might be in the grasses, and I'll be adding some little poofy things in a minute. But I just want some variety in the front. I don't want really to paint specific blades of grass. I don't want to get that detailed for this kind of painting. I'm going to let this dry a little bit. I'm going to switch brushes. Rinse out the brush. Don't ever leave it in your water. And I just kind of squeeze it dry. I'm picking up a very small brush. This is Rosemary and Company Animation #1 size watercolor brush. And I want to come back and add some light areas to the trunk of the tree. So I'm starting with white, and I'm dulling it down with an already mixed color that I have on my palette. So it isn't anything straight out of the palette. Okay, that might be a little too light. So I'm going to take it and just spread it around, and maybe that'll do. It was overcast, so there wasn't really a particular the sun wasn't in a specific place in the sky, so that might be a little hindrance to a painting like this. But these trees back here, those are too bright green, so I'm going to add some orange foliage in there because it is fall, and there were some trees in the valley that were orange like that, but I'm just going to add a little bit more to tone down that green and to tell the story of the fall. Oh, I got too much water in my brush. If you have too much water in your brush, see that formed a drop right there? Whew. Got to take it off, and it will lift off your paint, and I don't want that to happen. So, whoop. Probably need to let that dry again. My trouble is I'm not patient. Y'all don't have that trouble, do you? Anybody have that trouble of not being patient? Let me know. Why don't you let me know where you're from? I never know where anybody's from. Well, hardly anybody. I don't ask y'all to answer questions or let me know what's helpful. I know it would be helpful if you could see my palette. And I need another camera probably for that setup, but I don't have that right now. So we have to go. All right, I'm filming with my phone right now, and my netbook has the picture. So I want what's up front to have the darkest dark, and so the shadow up under this sign will be that darkest dark, and I just changed the shape of that sign. Didn't mean to, really. Okay, so we're going to drag some of that dark down. There's some moss on that sign, and in the there's a whole lot of moss growing right here, and I just know, and that's not really going to show up. It needs to be lighter. Lichen maybe is more what it is. I guess it's really more lichen. So I'm going to add some texture to that. I'll have to come back with some dark in between to try to make it look right. And there's a little bit of that down here. Pale green color. That looks kind of strange. I might end up changing that. Okay, when I look at the sign compared to my photo, my brown is not near dark enough. And the darkest brown that I have on my palette is burnt sienna. So when I put burnt sienna on my palette, that's way too red and kind of orange. So if I want to tone that down, I want to make it darker, I go to the blue, which is a ultramarine type blue. And blue and orange are opposite on the color wheel. So when I add those together, that's going to tone down the red of the orange and make a truer brown. If I add more blue to it, it's going to make almost black. So burnt sienna and ultramarine blue can make a really good dark. If you want it warmer, you have more burnt sienna. If you want it cooler, you have more of the blue. So I'm going to make this back here a little more texture in the tree trunk. You can see some of it. That I think that's actually too dark for where it is in the painting. So I'm going to make this darker. Ooh, that's way too dark too. But guess what? I'm going with it. Nope, needs a different brush. See how that doesn't, that's not strong enough. I need a stiffer brush. Lay this down, take it across, get more paint. Okay, I want it to look a little like wood, even though there's not a lot of streaks in it that you can see. So I'm lifting just a little bit of that out. That's looking a little better. And I want to create the dark to go all the way down with a little bit of that in. This needs some more shadows, so I'm plugging some of that in around some of those, the growth of that lichen that's up on top. That's giving it a better texture. Because you want to put a little bit of shadows in there, because if you don't create the lights and darks, it's not going to read right. Okay, so I want to add a little bit of pale yellow back here. That piece right here is too solid. So, and I want it pale because it's in the distance. I want the edge of that mountain to actually be softer. So I'm coming back with just a damp brush very lightly. I'm blurring that edge. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I want a softer edge right in the distance. And so if I just barely touch it and blur that edge, then hopefully visually it will go off into the distance a little bit better. Not sure what happened there. Okay, I want a little more blue in the shadows. A little lighter blue in the shadows. Try that again. Quite a bit of that up in here. I just changed the shape of the mountain. How about that? It happens sometimes. That's okay. Okay, now we're going to do some up-close foliage. I'm going to get the yellow ochre, which is gold color. I'm going to add white to it. This is thicker paint. I want it thicker paint because it's going to be, that's too, yeah, I want it more yellow. Yeah, there we go. All right, so we're gonna have a few yellow. Let's go even brighter. There was a really pretty yellow in that field. And see, we want to break the line of the distant hills, so we want that in a variety of places. Breaking that line so it allows your eye to keep moving on. And whoops, don't want that in front. A little bit over here. Let's go a little brighter up front. Thought it was goldenrod, but I think it's something else. I'm not really sure. But I'm not trying to do a specific flower, but it's just clumps of yellow going up from the field. So now we have, I need to go to a smaller brush. Let's see. I'm going to try this one on its side. So if I pick up a little white and let's see how bright that's going to be. Ooh, that's okay. I'm going to just do some little whisks that I lay it down flat. and barely turn. Probably trying to be too exact. You know, it's just, I just want it to look like different types of, that's too bright. Lift some of that off. And I want different shapes. You don't want them all to be the same. So whatever's in the distance is going to be smaller, less distinct. I'd really like, I'm not sure how well gouache will send flicks of paint, but I think I'd like to try that. Might as well. All right, so when I'm flipping paint, I want to protect the other picture for sure. And it would be good to protect around the upper part of the painting because you're not going to see flecks that high. And let's see, what else can I use? Index card. Let's put that there. All right, so I'm going to do some yellow flecks. We'll see how that goes. So I'm going to get a watery yellow. So it's watery, so it really might not show up much. Well, I can see it. Okay, let's go with watery white. Let's see if anything will flick off. There we go. All right, that's doable. Now, I didn't save the white here, so I'm just going to streak that across and just make it part of the sign. I'm going to blur these so it's not part of that. So that's also kind of a nice thing. All right, I don't like that white right there. That's a little too big and solid for where it is, too bright, so I'm just going to tone that down. That can be enough. So I need to let it dry. Let's see. Oh, I want to create a line, a lighter line above. Sorry about the shake. I just bumped my head on the phone. There's a lighter tone right there. Oh, and there's like 2 knobs, screws or whatever. Let's make that darker. Go into the black. Ooh, that's too dark. Almost is that dark. There's like a screw there and a screw there that's really dark to hold the sign on. And this now is not as dark as it needs to be. So I'm going to make that even darker. Okay. I'm going to let this dry. I'll come back in a little bit and peel off the tape, and then we'll do the lettering with a white gel pen. Well, unfortunately, I forgot to film the part where I took the tape off and did the lettering, but you can see the end result. And after staring at it for a day or two, I decided to come back and change it to alter what was there. I took out the tree and adjusted some of the colors a bit. But that's on another video. If you want to watch that, I'll include it here. But here is the final piece that's in my journal. So thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be heading to Texas soon because my mom decided to move to a senior living, independent living thing. So I might not be back for a bit.